actually, so before we hop into the script, we had a very special bond the night of the election of 2016 when Trump was elected, consoling each other on Facebook. And now we're kind of living in this like hell world.
Yeah.
At the time of recording this, Roe versus Wade was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court less than 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And a number of other concerning decisions have been ziplining through the Supreme Court. So it made me think that in our discussion about grief, which I did cater specifically to the loss of a loved one, there's many other types of grief, but what's going on, Lee?
I wish I knew. It's and it's really weird because my most immediate griefs just are all tied with this all of this together. You know, there's two levels. There's the epic global
doom,
dumpster fire, and then there's my everyday level of it, and it just reverberates. And when my personal grief pulls me away from the big stuff, and then the big stuff pulls me away from my personal stuff, and it's, oh my God,
it's exhausting.
Yeah, and I feel so helpless because I'm sitting here looking, stuff I marched for in the 90s, and now people who could be my grandchildren are having to march for, well, okay, maybe not my grandchildren, but my children could be, my adult children could be marching for it, are losing it. And it's, why?
As a history professor, you have a very intimate knowledge of history.
Yeah.
What are your concerns? Number one, because I'm a history teacher, I'm a high school teacher, and you know the common history repeats itself, or if it doesn't, it rhymes, or all that kind of stuff. What concerns do you have, and do you have any hope, or based on what you've seen in history? And I just would like to hear a little bit from you on that.
Well, I'm at a place personally where I don't have a lot of hope. I would like, but at the same time, I do see people like, first of all, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is in a position of power.
Shout out to AOC.
Yes,
if you're listening.
And my love, Elizabeth Warren, who is older than me, but there is a through line. I see young people like you, who is younger than me, and then I'll have students who come through class, and it's like, God, I hope there's more like them, because please. And I still have friends back in Texas who fight the good fight, and they have students who are like, every now and then you'll see protests around the Capitol in Austin, and Texas is my my touchstone because I grew up there. So it's like, okay, it's not all dead. It's not all dead. There is a resistance out there, but at the same time, my ultimate, I tend to be a pessimist. So, because I feel like if you're a pessimist, you won't be surprised by the hell, and you will be happy when good things happen. Right. And so, mostly I lack a lot of hope. I also think back, I don't know who said this. I was reading a lot about authoritarianism a couple of years ago, and I don't know if it was Hannah Arendt or Madeleine Albright, but because they're so much alike. But having come out of totalitarian states, they were talking about, as far as looking to history, what you do is you'll see patterns repeat themselves, but there's always going to be one piece that is different, and that's the one to look out for.
Not to doom. Is it possible that piece can be worse?
Yeah, well, that is usually it's the piece. It might be technology. It might be a political tactic. It might be something, but it's going to be a new piece that's going to be different, and that's what makes people not think it's the same.
Right.
But learning from history and that critical thinking that comes with history and that comparison and such, one. Always turning to Hitler and the Holocaust is a problem. It's apt, but there's other examples. And two, this is why there's such a struggle over history. On the one time, making history as a field such a contentious battleground, but at the same time, looking at it as a discipline in colleges, as a major in schools, tearing it down. Getting what's going on, especially in the higher education where people have a lot more freedom. Even just the freedom, the tenure, having that being dismantled, those two things are related. And so having people who don't study history determining what can be taught about history, and then not allowing people who study history to flourish. And so, yeah, those things are related, and they're political, and it's not just because it's my job, but they're related, and to keep people from learning from the past, I guess.
So one thing I wanted to mention is what responsibility for this Hellworld falls on Trump voters, and I want to qualify that with a couple things. I know there are people who have voted for him and did not the second time. However, I know people who have voted for him twice and kind of, whether they admit it or not, defend absolutely almost everything. And I've seen people who voted for him go on social media and be upset about the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So what kind of cautionary tale is this? You elect a president, he only served 4 years. No, we're knocking on wood. He chose 3 out of 9 justices, and I'm so thankful that he didn't get a 4th. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, I actually, most of what I think about that usually is emotional gut responses rather than qualified researched thought. But if I were to think about it carefully, a voting population is like you're saying, very diverse in their approach to it, in where they're coming at this. And the people who bear a lot of the responsibility are at the top, but they're selling something that people are buying. What people are buying at the bottom, it's they're coming at it from a lot of different directions.
But I have to say, if you vote for Trump and then you're upset about the overturning of Roe versus Wade, then at that point you're kind of boo-boo the fool,
Yeah, I know. And it's like, and there are varying circles of responsibility here. Like the people who, like the Proud Boys and all of those people who stormed the Capitol, they bear a lot of responsibility. There are people who I don't think are thinking a whole lot about things. They just go in and they vote because he seemed like a really cool guy who's on our side.
Yeah.
And sorry about the accent.
No.
But I come from Texas, so but there's a lot of people who aren't connecting the dots because they aren't thinking that. They're just, again, going from the gut response and probably voting, saying, well, I can't vote for that guy because he's going to be a socialist and he's going to turn us into Soviet Russia or whatever BS they're getting from Fox News.
There's a myth that the pendulum swings both ways. It doesn't. The myth is that, the only fears that people on the right have are of leftist extremists, which we never elect president. So whereas people think the pendulum swings left and right, it really swings right and stops in the middle. We have middle of the road presidents, and then it goes to extremist right, and it never has gone to extremist left, and I don't think in this country it ever will. So I'd like to dispel that myth. And the second thing I want to say, and I'm not being high-minded here, I'm being emotional, I have started to disagree with free speech in this country. And I've always evaluated to what extent it should or could be limited. But it made me think that if someone is saying crazy stuff, we write that off and we say, well, they have free speech, they're protected. And then what? They get a following, they get elected, and it becomes policy. So someone's crazy stuff is going to become policy. And in my opinion, someone along the line should say, stop. And for those who don't know, the KKK still exists in this country,
Yes.
and they are protected. They are able to. I think that's wrong. I think to say you're identifying yourself as a Nazi, that is a fine. That's and I know I'm being an extremist here, but you have to stop it before, because what I'm noticing is now we're seeing all this extremism that people were just free speeching about, and now it's getting turned into action.
Yeah, I'm not sure where, like I'm thinking about that, because this becomes a very philosophical question, because the totalitarian regimes that go, like, whether you go right or left. I was just watching the Peaky Blinders, and what he says is sometimes when you're walking far enough left, you meet somebody else who's walking far enough right, and they meet, and that also goes back to when my parents took a class with T. Harry Williams, which will mean nothing to you, but he was a big Civil War historian at LSU back in the day. He said that, that if you think of the political spectrum, left and right, it's actually more like a horseshoe where the ends almost meet. I may be remembering wrong if it was T. Harry Williams. Anyway, that's beside the point. The point is that, when you start getting to the far ends where it becomes totalitarianism. And so I worry, like, if you start limiting free speech, are you going... Exactly. Are you coming around again? And so, but I think, okay, well, there was a time where, what has free speech meant? And there has always been limits on it. And so there's been a division between the private sector and the public, in the governmental, the public sector. There's been what you're entitled to believe versus what you're entitled to do. Like the decision that is not, I can't remember what it was, but there's a limit, like, for instance, that puts other people in danger, yelling fire in a crowded theater.
That's Schenck versus the United States.
Yes, thank you.
Clear and present danger.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
I know I just talked about it like a year ago.
That's your high school history. I gotcha.
Yeah. That's what I have Google for. Yeah. There's different, these sorts of things have been hashed out as philosophical and legal questions. Yeah, when you have a guy, like what we were finding out yesterday, when you have somebody who knows that there is an armed crowd and stokes them up to go to Congress to start a coup,
things mean things.
Yeah, there should be consequences.
Right. and there's a lot of discourse about the Supreme Court justices lying under oath.
Yeah.
And who's going to do anything about it?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that all turns out.
And in free speech, you can say something. That doesn't mean there aren't consequences of saying something. And I think a lot of the discourse also is like, you can say anything and do anything, and that's a 2-year-old's concept.
Right. And I hope I didn't give you that impression that I...
No, I wanted to
to
hash the middle there.
Yeah, but on the other end, there's only consequences so far as the listener is willing to pursue them.
Yeah.
And so that's my point. When you threaten violence, there should be consequences, but depending on the group.
Well, and then that's when you have to start looking at what is the power that's going on around.
Right.
That, like, well, again, like the prayer thing that came down. That was a coach who is a public employee who's saying a prayer in the middle of a football field before a game.
And, might I add, claimed he did not force but he may have.
Yeah, but whether he did or not, if you're a student, you understand the power relationship.
Right.
You understand what can happen. So you are living in the fear that, the power that is around that. And you don't know. I mean, he's obviously allowed to do this, so you don't know that the principal isn't going to back this up. The superintendent isn't going to back. You're a kid.
Right.
You're a minor.
And you have to understand the community too. Like, it's illegal to display a nativity scene at a public school, but who in my school district is gonna? Yeah. And they're gonna be like, well, it's you know what I mean? So it's a very fine line.